Hi, my name is Ernest, and tonight I'm going to show you how to replace the differential bearings in the new Tekno 1/8 scale EB48 buggy. I have some very nice orange seal ceramic bearings supplied by the fine folks at Boca Bearings to do this video. So to get started, we're going to need a set of gaskets and seals for your differentials. You're going to need 6 Boca bearing part number SMR 688C20S number 7 AF2, 4 SMR 115C20S number 7 AF2. You're also going to need a 2.5 millimeter driver, a 2 millimeter driver, a set of needle nose pliers, some medium Loctite, a small screwdriver, black grease, and diff oils of your choice. I'm running stock setup in my buggy, and they are as follows: 7,000 in the front, 5,000 in the center, and 3,000 in the rear. So for time management for this video, because there's a lot of work involved, I have pre-loosened all the screws that I possibly can on the vehicle to get started. But to begin with, we're going to remove the front bumper. Front bumper has one screw in the very front, in the center, and two in the bottom. So once you get your screws out, you just slide the front bumper to the front and work it out of the way. Next thing we're going to go after is going to be the sway bar mount. You have 2 screws holding that in, slide it off the front, put it to the side. Okay, after that we'll go for the hinge pin brace, and those are 2 millimeter screws. They go in the front of the differential. Those I could not pre-loosen because they are behind the bumper. So we got those loose, and then we'll just slide the brace right off the front, put it to the side. Next we're going to go for the top plate. Top plate has 5 screws holding it in place. And we'll just pop it off the top and put it to the side. After that, we'll remove the 4 screws holding the shock tower to the transmission case assembly. Take those 4 loose, take them out, put them to the side. Now what we can do is we can take the entire front suspension with the shock tower, work it up off the transmission, and we can just fold it back out of our way like that. Now the only thing left holding the transmission in is the differential, excuse me, is the 2 remaining bolts that come up through the bottom. So we'll take those out, and then we'll lift the differential assembly off the vehicle. Put the vehicle to the side. Grab a rag. Now, The only thing, once we removed everything, the only thing we had left holding the differential cases together are these two screws at the top here. So we're going to go ahead and pull those out. And separate the two case halves. Pull the differential assembly out. We'll set that case to the side for the time being. We'll come back to it later for the pinion bearings. And wipe all the excessive grease off. Now when you take this apart, you want to take care because you have two very small thin shims outboard of both the bearings. You know how small that is? And we'll slide those off of there and set them to the side because we're going to reinstall those later. Okay? Then you're going to take a 2mm driver and you've got 4 screws going through the ring gear into the differential housing, and we're going to have to remove those. Now once you have those 4 screws removed, we're just going to take and we're going to work that ring gear off of that housing, and we're going to have a bunch of the old oil in there. So we'll take a pair of needle nose pliers and we'll grab one of the side gears and we'll just pop it off of there, and we'll take and clean that up. Put it to the side. Wipe some of this old grease, some of this old differential fluid out of here so we can see. So, now what we have is we have a pin, cross pin, going through the out drive. We have to remove that cross pin, and we can slide the out drive off. And now's a good time to take and clean up this out drive. Just wipe it off. Get in there where all that dirt and everything's been working in there around your shafts, your drive shafts. And we'll set that to the side. Now underneath this shim, we're going to remove this shim, and you have your seal, one of your seals, and also the paper differential gasket. And we'll try and get that out of there. There we go. Got it removed. And once again, we'll take and we'll clean up the inside of that ring gear. Take a new gasket, lay it in there. Make sure you line up the holes where the screws go through. So the gasket bottoms out nicely in there. Okay. And we'll take a new seal and we're going to pre-lube it with some black grease. That's going to help the seals actually seal a little bit better and keep that differential fluid inside the diff where it needs to be. And just take and work some of that in there. Put that seal down in place. Put a little more black grease around it. wipe off our shim. Put it down in place. Take your out drive. Before you slide your out drive in, probably a good idea, just put a little bit of black grease around the shaft of the out drive so when it goes through that seal, it doesn't cut it. Oh, and one important factor here. Slide the old bearing off. We're going to slide our new Boca orange seal ceramic bearing on there. And I'll tell you, these things, they spin so much freer than the factory bearings. So we're going to put that in there like that. Take our needle nose pliers, put our cross pin back in place, and we'll set that aside for the time being. Now what we're going to do is we're going to reach in here with the needle nose pliers and we're going to pull out our gear set. We have 2 of these gear sets in here. This is called spider gears. And we're also going to reach down in the bottom with the needle nose and pull out the other side gear. Now, we also have a cross pin in the bottom of this housing. And you need to line the cross pin up with one of these slots in the housing and reach in there with your pliers, with your needle nose, and just work it out of there. Next you can slide your other out drive out. And I'm going to reach in there with my small screwdriver. And work my other shim out of there eventually. It's being a pain. There it goes. Kind of glued in there from the grease. Then we're going to get our other seal out. So now you have your housing all disassembled, and you're going to want to clean this up. Especially if you have some run time on it, like I do on my truck. You want to take that thing out in the garage and spray it out with some kind of solvent or cleaner to get all the old grease and dirt and grime out of there. I seem to have quite a bit in mine. Pop off the old bearing, put it to the side. I think that's what I'm going to do, is take a moment here and go clean some things up. I'll be right back. Okay, got everything all cleaned up nicely. Now, I use brake parts cleaner. Comes in an aerosol can. It's available at pretty much any auto parts store. It's pretty good to use. It has a little bit of power in the aerosol, which helps blow out, all the debris and everything else. And it's a nice cleaner, and it doesn't leave any residue behind. So once you clean it, if you have compressed air, it's even better if you can blow everything off and blow it out when you're done. So as you can see, I got everything cleaned up like new, and it just took me a couple of minutes. So anyway, what we're going to start with is we'll take another ceramic orange seal bearing, slide it on the differential. Then we're going to take another one of these little orange seals and coat it with some black grease. Just a thin coat, don't need a whole bunch. Now we're going to go down in the bottom of the differential housing where the slot is, where the O-ring sits down in, and put just a little dab of black grease down in there also. So we'll take that and we'll work that in there with my finger. And I'll take the out drive and I'll put just a little bit of grease on the shaft of the out drive just to help install it into the seal. Take the out drive, slide it through. Now we'll take our shim from before and we'll push it down in there. You may want to take your small screwdriver and help position it properly. And that'll push that down in place. Now your hole for your cross pin lines up with the slot in your out drive. So you take your slot in your out, because you can't really see the hole real well looking down through the housing because it's so far down in there. So what you're going to do is take that slot in that out drive and line it up with two of the slots in the housing. And you take your needle nose pliers with your cross pin and grab it on somewhat of an angle, and you can take it and slide it in the slot and work it right in there. See how easy that was? Just a little tech tip there when you're putting these things together, because if you can't see that hole in that shaft, you can fumble around in there for quite a while and not be able to get it in place. So you're going to take your side gear now and put it down in there with the teeth facing up. Work it in place till it sets down in there, and turn this. It's all nice and turns nice and free. The bearing turns nice and free. Everybody's happy. So I'm going to set that down. Now, your spider gears. Your shafts, both of them have a little slot cut right in the center. So your bottom set, you want to put with that slot facing up. Lay it down in there, slot facing up, side gear, one spider gear on each side of the side gear. Now your second set, you want to put in there with the slot facing down so that it locks into the other shaft. Keeps them all nice and straight and happy. Okay, so you got your spider gears installed. Now you're ready for some fluid. So this is our front diff. I'm going to put the stock oil in there, which is 7,000. And we're just going to squeeze that in there. I'm going to fill it all the way to the top of the spider gears. And maybe even just a little bit extra. We can wipe out the excess later. I'd rather have a little bit too much at this point. So I'll take, work that oil down in there and in the grooves. And even gently give the spider gears a turn. And it's going to suck some of that oil. See, it sucked a whole bunch of that oil down in there into the empty spots. So we're going to top that off. I'll lay my other side gear in here. Top the oil off again, right to the top of the case. And I always put just a little bit more than that, because what I like to do is I like to turn that and get it all settled and make sure that thing's nice and full. And just take your finger and wipe across the top. Get the excess out. Now that housing is nice and full. Now if you notice, I lined up the slots in the side gear with the slots in the housing, and I'm also going to take, not the slots in the housing, but the screw holes. So you're going to line up the slots in the side gear with the screw holes in the housing. And the reason I do this is because I'm going to take the cross pin and I'm going to line it up with the screw holes. So when you set this back down on here, it goes in, your screw holes are all nice and lined up, and you can snap that gear back down on that housing, and your screws are going to go right in place where they belong, and there's not going to be a fight. So I'll get all 4 of my screws started. So I'm going to take 2 of these screws, I'm going to run them all the way down till they come in contact with the gear. This gear fits kind of tight on the housing, and you can't really get it all the way down there usually by hand. So you're going to use the screws to pull it down tight onto the housing. But you're going to do that a little bit at a time from one side to the next so you don't chew up the housing or damage the gear. So I'm going to tighten that one down just a little bit and come over here a little bit, a little bit, a little bit till it bottoms out. Once it bottoms out, make them nice and snug, then you tighten up your other 2. So now we got all 4 of our screws nice and tight, side gear, the ring gears on the case nice and snug, all your screws are tight. I'm going to give this a turn, make sure it works nice and free, there's no clicking, no binding. Okay, so that feels good. So we're going to put that to the side for a minute. Now we're going to get our housing, and we're going to come around and take the coupler off. Loosen the set screw up, slide the coupler off, slide our pinion gear out, take our small screwdriver. Oh, one important note. On your pinion, you've got a very small, thin shim that goes between the pinion and the inner bearing. Don't lose that shim. A lot of times it would stick to the bearing like it did just then when I pulled the pinion out. And when you pop that bearing out of there, you can put that bearing to the side and forget about it and lose it and end up with a premature differential failure. Now to ruin anybody's race day. So we got those out of the way, got them wiped off. I'm just going to reach in here with our regular screwdriver, pop the bearings out. Okay. Now I'm going to take another moment and go out in the garage, and I'm going to spray off these housings and get them nice and clean, ready to go back together. Okay, so everything's cleaned up and we're ready to reassemble. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the pinion, the small thin shim we spoke about earlier, and put that shim on the pinion, and I'm going to take and slide the bearing, the new Boca ceramic orange seal bearing, on the pinion. I'm going to stick it down in the bottom of the front case, slide it in place, and I'll take the outer bearing and I'll slide it in place. Next we're ready for the coupler. Now if you notice, the pinion has a flat spot machined into the shaft, and that's where you're going to line up your set screw. It's very critically important that that set screw be on that flat spot, otherwise it can come loose on you during the race, and again, major failure. So you're going to take that, you're going to take a finger on the inside, on the bottom of the pinion, on the outside on the coupler. You're going to squeeze them together and tighten it up. When you get done, it should turn nice and freely. Man, them bearings feel good. Turn nice and freely, and should be no end play. Shouldn't be able to slide it back and forth at all. It's perfect. So now we're ready to set our differential back in place. Now, let's talk about these shims we took out in the beginning. These shims set the preload on your ring and pinion. Now, usually 9 times out of 10, your best setting is going to be 1 on each side. So we're going to install 1 on each side, slide it over the coupler, carefully lower it in place and make sure they fall in place with the bearings in the slots that they're provided for in the case. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to roll that ring and pinion, and what we're looking for is a smooth operation, no binding. That feels real good. So if it was binding, let's just say it was binding. So what we're going to do if it's binding, if it's too tight, is we'll take the shim from the ring gear side and we'll move it over here to the other side, and what that's going to do is that's going to slide the whole differential over just that little bit to loosen that clearance up a little bit. Now if it's too loose, if you hold the ring gear in place and you can rock the coupler back and forth excessively, you should be able to, knock the thing out of there. Sorry. Okay. You hold that in place and hold it tightly from turning. You should be able to move the coupler back and forth just a little bit. If you can move it too much, if it's got too much slop in it, then you're going to take the shim from the other side and move it over to the ring gear side, and that's going to push the ring gear in tighter onto the pinion. So you get the idea. So now, before final assembly, before we put the other case half on, I'm going to take a bead of black grease and we're going to go all the way around the ring gear. Get as far as you can and then turn it. You want a nice bead of black grease around that ring gear. Keep that lubricated. And I'll take and I'll roll it by hand a couple times. Get some grease in there. Okay. Now you're ready to reassemble your halves. And when you do, make sure your shim doesn't fold out of the way on you. That went in nicely. It feels great. No binding. Everything's working nice and freely. So you're going to install the 2 top screws. Put those in. Those in nice and snug. Give everybody a turn again, and it feels good. Perfect. Alright, so we'll set that differential to the side. Now it's a good idea at this point, if you got, especially if you got some run time on your buggy, is go ahead and pull your front drive shaft out. And let's take a nice clean rag and let's wipe all the dirt and grime and old grease off of it. And what we're going to do is we're going to take just a real thin coat of black grease and put around the pins and the ball part of the shaft. Just a real thin. Anything more than the thin coat is just going to get slung out everywhere and make a mess in your truck. And this is just good maintenance to make make your couplers in your shaft last just a little bit longer. Okay, so we'll set that aside for reassembly later. So the next thing we'll do is we'll go after the center diff. Now to remove the center diff, I'm going to take the 4 screws holding the top plate and the top plate itself off. And remember, I pre-loosened everything in the beginning. I'll take that off. Then you're going to take 3 screws, 1 out of the top and 2 out of the bottom for your center brace. You pull your brace out of the way. And you take the 3 front screws out, the bottom that holds the motor plate and the front center bearing carrier. Now also what I'll do is at this point I would just loosen the 2 back screws for the back bearing carrier, and you can actually lift up your motor and slide it off the differential and put it to the side, and then you can slide the differential, and the rear drive shaft came out with it, but you can slide the differential right out of the housing. Now for time management, I'm not going to go through building this differential. It's exactly the same as the front differential. The only difference being is you have a spur gear here in place of the ring gear and no pinion. So you're going to do this differential exactly the same way as you did the front one, with the exception of you're not going to deal with the cases and the pinion. Okay, now to remove the rear differential, you're going to pull the screws out for the rear hinge pin brace and work it off. Might need a little small screwdriver or something to kind of work it off of there. Just going to work it off, set it to the side. Then you're going to take your sway bar mount, slide it off, put it to the side. Your lower wing screws, you're going to pull those out. A pair of needle nose come in handy here. Grab those and pull those out of there, and be careful, there's washers on there. One of them came out, one of them didn't. There we go. So there's my other washer. Okay. All right. Next thing you're going to do is pull out your lower shock tower screws. And now what you can do is you can actually take the whole rear suspension and just lift it right completely, wing everything right off the truck, and put it to the side. And at that point, all you have holding your differential in is just 4 screws at the bottom, and 1 screw at the top for your rear chassis brace. And then you can you may have to loosen up the bottom screw for the chassis brace. So you can move it off to the side and just lift your differential out. And again, this differential is exactly like the front one. You're going to do it exactly like the front one. The only thing you want to take care in on reassembly is if you get things mixed up or set things down out of the way, just be careful, because the rear differential, the pinion comes out straight. You see how that's straight and level? Where your coupler comes out nice and straight. Well, if you look at the front one, it comes out at an angle. So just make sure you don't switch them up and put the front one in the back and the back one in the front. Otherwise, they're almost identical. And at this point, you also would be a good idea, just like the front drive shaft, is to take the little rear one, clean the ball ends up, put a thin coat of grease on, and while you've got it apart, you can actually pop and take and clean the ball ends of your drive shafts on the front and the rear, and clean those up and put a little bit of grease on those as well. Just some good maintenance tips. So once you've built your other two diffs, just put it all back together in the reverse order, and you should have a good running truck with some very nice ceramic bearings. I want to thank the fine folks at Boca Bearings for supplying the bearings for this video. I had fun doing it. I hope it was informative and helped you out some. That's all I got for this evening. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Have a good night.